Hi, everyone, and welcome to Catalysts for Change, the show where we explore the stories, strategies, and turning points of leaders driving meaningful impact in their communities and across the country. I'm Adam Lister, and I'm so glad you're here. Today's guest is a leader whose story is equal parts grit, grace, and generosity. Sunny Bray is the founder and CEO of Catalyst Collective, a branding and strategy consultancy helping nonprofits deepen their impact. She's a mom, a community builder, a woman of faith and fire, and someone who has turned grief and setbacks into bold dreams and a thriving company. From launching a powerful network of young professionals to building an agency that empowers nonprofits through storytelling, Sunny not only leads with purpose, she lives it. In today's episode, we'll talk to Sunny about her journey from corporate sales to community builder, how grief and grit shaped her leadership, and why showing up authentically and unapologetically can unlock purpose, impact, and transformation. Let's dive in. Sunny, thank you for being here today. It's a pleasure to meet you and spend some time with you. So thank you for making your way in. And for those of folks that are listening now, we're recording this in the middle of CMA week. So this was a real test to your grit and determination on how you could really navigate Nashville traffic on a day where we've got 90,000 country music fans walking around our streets. So thank you for being here this morning.
Thanks for having me.
You are a mom and recently lost your mom. She passed away in December of last year, I believe. And you've talked a lot about the experiences that you've had and the lessons you've learned from her, being an immigrant coming into the United States in the 70s, limited ability to speak English, but she became a successful small business owner. Mm-hmm. As you've thought about and learned from and imparted those lessons from your mom, I'm curious to know, what did her journey tell you and teach you about perseverance and identity and leadership?
When I think back about my mom and how she showed up, she really didn't care what anybody else thought. And even when I started my business, I don't know why I never looked back to her, because my role model was right there in front of me the whole time. She had overcome so much in her time here. I mean, even just moving to the States, leaving a country she grew up in, leaving her family, and moving to a completely new country, not knowing the language, overcoming hate and discrimination and judgment. I can think back to many times when she was mistreated, disrespected, and she always handled it with such grace. And she knew what she wanted to accomplish. And what she wanted to accomplish was a life for herself and a life for her family.
When you see those things happening, mm-hmm. and you see that mistreatment or the lack of tolerance, were those things that were obvious to you as a kid, or do you notice them as an adult reflecting back? And how does that help mm-hmm. you think about rejection? We've got a quote on our refrigerator that says, "Never let me suffer the indignity of confusing contradiction as persecution." Mm-hmm. But in some cases, people are actually approaching you in ways that are hateful or really negative. How do you filter through those moments and reflect on those either as a child, as an adult, and use those to power mm-hmm. the work that you're doing today?
So when I think back to my childhood, I never really noticed it. I think it wasn't on my radar. It wasn't something that I noticed that maybe I was the only person of color in the room or at my school or in my neighborhood. It wasn't, honestly, it really wasn't until I became older, started my career, and then more so after George Floyd and the way that the administration had suggested that the Asian population, specifically the Chinese, was the cause of the pandemic, that a lot of those situations really came to light and incorporated more of a fear within me of, I may be subject to violence or attacks or disrespect simply because of what I look like. I actually had a conversation with my husband once. We were leaving a Preds game and decided to walk through downtown, city we live in. We never go to Broadway, but we decided, let's go meet a friend. and instantly felt discomfort and this fear. And it occurred to me that we were surrounded by people that may think differently than me. And I immediately wanted to get out of there. I think once I realized the possibility of how I may be treated for something that was completely out of my control and how I look, all these factors really kind of lined up and made me realize you start to notice what's around you. I use the same example when I initially got into nonprofit work. I had discovered homelessness and poverty. And in my decade of living in Indianapolis, I finally saw that. So then after I saw that, it's like the rose-colored glasses had come off. Now in every city, every community I went to, I could not see homelessness. And same thing goes with underrepresentation. Now I walk into rooms and I can't help but count how many people of color are in the room. Or if I scroll through Instagram and I see somebody post about their new executive board or their new executive leadership team, and there might be a couple of women sprinkled in there, but again, they're all white. And so I've gotten really bold over the last couple years because of what's happened in our world, but also because I became a mom. And losing my mom, a lot of those things have strengthened my belief system. And a friend and mentor once told me, because when it was all happening initially, I found myself getting really angry and really frustrated. And I said, what do I do? What do we do? Like, isn't there something that we can do about this? Like, how do we change this world? How do we get people to see what we see? Like, how do they not see that there's a problem? There's a lack. There's no diversity. And I said, do we call them on their shit? And this was before I realized I was speaking to a pastor. And he said, Sunny, people in positions of power are never going to change if they're never challenged. And so I think there is a respectful, classy way to help bring light to situations. And then the rest is up to them.
We've talked a little bit about my background is largely in advocacy and politics, and the fact that the middle is shrinking. In fact, I think recent analysis shows that only 16 congressional districts currently are considered in kind of true, authentic swings. Mm-hmm. In the 90s, that was somewhere around 190, I believe. When the middle gets smaller, the hallway with those open doors that could go either way becomes even more difficult to get into them. And those elected officials often reflect the small super minority of voices that are in that electorate, and figuring out how to lift up new voices on matters of policy or representation is not impossible, but it can be incredibly demoralizing. And when folks look at this and say, how could I even make a difference? Your entire business has been focused, from what I can tell, on how to lift a lot of these organizations up and build momentum and build impact. Mm-hmm. Thinking about your experience probably shows up in many of the clients that you have. Mm-hmm. And your pathway into the work that you're doing now, I think, is unique in that you began your career in business sales, not in nonprofit space.
Right.
And I think it gives you a unique window. You've obviously made that pivot into supporting for-profit organizations. What was the moment, you've talked a little bit about over the last few years, but what was the moment early in your career where you began to see that this sort of work could be bigger than just you?
Yeah. How I've learned to combat that is, I've done a lot of therapy over the years, and I've chosen to, look at that from a different angle as more of, because every time that I've been rejected, it's always led to something bigger and greater that I didn't even know was on the table. As far as making the shift from working with for-profit businesses to now working with nonprofits, I never set out to be an entrepreneur. I've had a pretty non-lateral career path. I was really good at sales. I was really good at business development. I enjoyed working with tech startups. I loved working with small businesses, being able to roll my sleeves up and get things done, seeing the impact that I was making. My parents never understood it, being the generation that they're used to working for a big corporate company. You stay there for 30 plus years, you retire. And that was never my jam. I wanted to work with small businesses. And then when I was living in Indianapolis, had got involved with some leadership training. That's when they had a lot of volunteer opportunities for us. That's when I discovered an area of town called Tent City. I'd lived there for a decade and didn't even know it existed. It was a block from Lucas Oil Stadium. And just seeing these folks and how kind and how grateful they were. And it was, it's something that you see and it just breaks your heart that people are living like that. And our group, in 4 hours of just reaching out to friends and family, had raised over $44,000. But I knew that that wasn't enough. I knew that that wasn't going to move the needle. It wasn't going to get them out of poverty. And so that was the first experience that I had. And I truly believe that there are certain experiences you can go through in your life that will ultimately change the trajectory of your life. And that was the first. And so from there, I thought, I think I need to go work with a nonprofit. And I had talked with a few folks about it, and I got pushback. Everyone said, no, don't do it. There's no money in it. Your skill set is strong in what you're doing. Just throw money at the causes you care about. And then I lost my friend. He was 27 to melanoma. And at his funeral, I've never heard so many people refer to one person as their best friend. And all I could think was, what am I doing with my life? How am I changing other people's lives? What's my legacy? And I moved. That's when I decided to move closer to home. So I left Indianapolis, been there for 11 years, built a strong network, but I decided to move back, be closer to family. And I'm so glad I did. Looking back, I kind of wish I would have come back sooner. Maybe I would have had a little bit more time with my mom. But everything happens for a reason. And when I came back, I immersed myself in this community. I started a networking group. I got introduced to somebody who was in Atlanta working with an organization. And get this, the mission of the organization was to alleviate poverty and hunger through the use of technology. And so when I met her, I thought she just wanted me to help open some doors. They actually wanted to hire me. And at the time, it wasn't necessarily looking for any opportunity, but I had such a strong faith. And I mentioned my non-lateral career path. I did a lot of job hopping throughout my early career and was always looking for something that was going to give me the fulfillment. And I always prayed to God and said, just tell me what you want me to do. Give me this big, bright sign and I will do it. Because I know that if I do whatever it is that you tell me to do, whatever, journey you have me on, then I will be happy. And so when this opportunity came, I thought, oh my gosh, it fell into my lap. This is exactly what I'm supposed to do. And so for the next year, well, prior to, typical woman fashion, I didn't believe in myself. I was like, I've never done anything like this before. I don't know if I can do it. I don't meet all the qualifications. But it was their confidence in me and the confidence of my support circle that said, you can do this. So I jumped in and I assembled a board of 12 CIOs, of friends and mentors, secured $100,000 in funding, brought a big nonprofit client on. It was making great strides. And I started to walk into some rooms, and I can kind of feed off of people's energies. I can read a room. I can tell if somebody is giving me a bit of the cold shoulder, but I didn't know why. So I started asking some questions, and come to find out the reason I was being treated like that was because my CEO had come to town and was telling people that we were doing things that we hadn't yet done. Looking back, I know now that he just doesn't know this community and how deeply relational it is. And it is a big, small town, and people talk. Well, that got around to a lot of other folks in this community, and it put me in a really bad spot. Took that information back to leadership, and I said, hey, it's actually been brought to my attention that, and I quote was, we think Sunny's lovely, but we are not going to be working with this organization. So I told leadership, I said, I don't know if I'm going to be able to meet these goals that we've set, at least not in the timeline that we set. A week later, I was asked to resign. At that time, I was somebody who associated my worth with what I did. I was ashamed, I was embarrassed, and I was lost. I had no idea what my career looked like after that. Also, I had hired a gender discrimination attorney. There was a man in Birmingham and a man in Atlanta that were not performing the way that I was, yet I was asked to resign. So, aside from all the emotions I was feeling, I'd reached out to an old high school friend, and I was like, I think this is the time that I sit on a beach and I do some reflecting and I journal and I figure out my next step. So he was living in Tampa at the time, and he was like, yeah, come on down. We spent 6 days together. We did long distance for 3 months. I convinced him to move to Nashville. We bought a house. We got engaged in 7 months. He encouraged me, supported me in starting my business. We got married, and now we have a beautiful baby girl.
That's great. It's always nice to have a happy ending.
Yeah.
It can be difficult. You talk about the feelings of just feeling ashamed and kind of questioning your value. Mm-hmm. You've walked away from jobs in your sales career and then have paid a personal price for confronting lapses in judgment, mm-hmm. as you just talked about. I'm curious, when you think about all of those sorts of things, those moments obviously shaped your vision and your values for your life. And you go and you spend those 6 days on the beach. What were the things that kind of came up first and foremost that started out as potentially just kind of little kernels of things or trends that have grown or helped connect to other bigger things as you've taken this next step that ultimately led to this becoming a catalyst for catalysts?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't change anything. Everything happened in its right way. They were all stepping stones in some way. Even when I started the networking group, when I first moved to Nashville, I've shared many times that I'm not an event planner. I had no experience hosting events. This was also a new city to me, but I strongly believed in the power of networking and building relationships and what that can bring to your life, both personally and professionally. And so I did that. I did something that I didn't know I could do, and it was wildly successful, and I was able to impact many people's lives through that. When I was working with that previous organization, I developed a lot of great relationships in the community, in the nonprofit community, funders, donors, and I got to hear from them, have conversations about, what were they funding? What were the challenges? What were the lack of resources? And so I think every experience I've had up until that point kind of gave me the tools, the skill sets, the wherewithal, the knowledge to be able to have what I have today. Essentially, what we're doing now is we're connecting nonprofits with the right resources. I wouldn't be able to connect them with the right resources if I didn't have the network. I wouldn't be able to have great relationships with the funders had I not gone through that previous experience. And, doing that work gave me a better understanding of what the needs and the challenges were. Prior to even starting the business, it was really, sitting down, thinking through, like, what am I good at? What do I enjoy? What brings me joy? Not just what everybody else has always told me that I'm good at. And I had a mentor tell me too once, if you were to take money out of the equation, what would you do? And so these were some of the thoughts and the questions that, ran through my mind. And before I officially started Catalyst Collective, I did a bit of a listening tour. I needed to make sure that the business was viable. I needed to make sure that we were positioned well, that it was even going to provide value to nonprofits and the community. So I talked to funders. I talked to nonprofits. I said, what do you fund? What are you finding is, the greatest need for them? Hey, nonprofit, give me a list. Like, what are your challenges? If you could have this off your plate, or you could, what do you need? And, through all of that, that's really how Catalyst Collective was born.
That's great. You've described what I think is probably the most effective fundraising strategy too, is that you sit down and you talk to your donors or your prospects to really, truly and authentically understand what are their barriers, what are their motivations, and how does your work fit into their theory of change, as opposed to asking them to fit into whatever structured box you've created.
Right. What's the gap and how do you fill it?
Right. You, as you've started Catalyst Collective and have seen it evolve, I mentioned earlier before we began recording that I think your company is a unique, offers a unique value to nonprofits. And from my view, is not a typical consultancy. You've got a lot of folks that want to do strategic work like what we do, or that might do fundraising related work, or might help on the tax side. And when I think about the work you do, I think more about the kind of the feeling and the connectivity than necessarily the structural elements, but that the things that you do help reinforce and add value to those structural elements. I'm curious to get your perspective on what you think makes your approach unique, number one, but then also to go back to something I've seen you say and heard you say before, that your purpose, meaning our purpose, Catalyst's purpose, is your impact of the nonprofits that you serve. What does that mean to you in practice? And how is your uniqueness showing up to help them live that out?
At the end of the day, I want to be of value. I want what we deliver to our clients to be valuable. I want it to help them, support them, make their lives easier. We understand that they're on the front lines. They're the ones that are changing communities. And if we can uplift them, equip them with what they need, that's how we're ultimately going to see change in our communities. We're different in that we're so niche. We only work with nonprofits and mission-driven organizations. And so that kind of gives us a bit of an advantage. And as you mentioned earlier, I approach things through a different lens, given my background, more through a business perspective. I don't believe in the scarcity mindset. I believe in abundance. Hence the collective that we have. I have vetted every single consultant in small business that's a part of our collective. However, we specialize in storytelling, marketing communications, and web development. That's not to say that when one of our clients comes to us and says, Sunny, we need a strategic planner. We need a new accountant. Do you have somebody that can help us with IT managed services? I've already identified those people for them. I've done the legwork. And that's building a network. That's relationship building. Anything that you need in this life, you turn to your friends. and you ask, I needed a new doctor. I need a new dentist. Do you have a plumber? And you ask them what they think, who have they worked with in the past. So we've done the legwork for them. And the hope is to become a trusted partner, a trusted advisor to them, all while helping them better tell their story, share their impact so that they can engage more donors, more volunteers, and focus on the work that they're doing day to day.
I think you've inadvertently plugged one of my favorite fundraising books, The Trusted Advisor.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is positioning yourself as, if you're the nonprofit, if you are the executive director of a mission-based organization, positioning yourself as a guide and a partner
Mm-hmm.
to the folks that you're engaging with, incredibly valuable. And you taking that same approach and applying that to the nonprofits who are doing community-based, mission-based work, I think really speaks also to their identity and their culture.
Right.
We talked a little bit about it briefly at the beginning, but you recently experienced an incredible personal loss in your mother. You talked a lot about how her lessons and her experience has laid a foundation for you and what it's meant for you in your life. But I'm curious, in the specific season that you are now a mom and you're running a business. How do some of those lessons show up in your leadership today,
Mm-hmm.
not just reflectively as you look back on the things that you knew or have come to understand about your mom?
Yeah. My mom was a force, to be correct. I mean, she was spicy and she worked her ass off. I mean, I never saw this woman rest. She cut the grass. There were no gender roles in my household. She worked so hard as really a solopreneur for most of her life. And with that came some sacrifices, right? And I know you said, I think back to, and I've talked with my dad about this. I'm like, how did you guys get around town? I don't understand. You didn't have a GPS back then. I fully relied on my Google Maps, and here my mom was didn't speak the language, was in a different country, yet still managed to take me to piano lessons or volleyball lessons. So I look at that, and, there were times in my childhood where, I wish she would have shown up to my volleyball games. I wish I would have had more playtime. And so that's shifted. That's changed me as a mother. There's lots that has changed me as a mother. 6 months after my daughter was born, I finally saw a therapist. I've been seeing a therapist for over 4 years now. That's nothing my mom would have done. I wanted to end the cycle. I wanted to end the patterns, the cycle of generational trauma. I typically don't take meetings on Fridays. Fridays are my days to do whatever I want. If I want to go for a walk with a friend, go to lunch, catch up from the week, admin work, I do that. I think that's the beauty of entrepreneurship, is it comes with freedom of time, freedom of dollar. I can go pick up my kid early from school if I want to. That's the season I'm in right now. And I want to be able to show up fully. I don't want to show up stressed. I don't want to show up thinking, being there physically, but thinking about something else. Of course, I want to provide for my family and I want to make a difference in my community, but I also want to set an example for her. An example that she as a woman can do and be anything she wants to be. She as a woman of color can also do the same. Again, it's back to representation, but it's not only about her. It's about all the other young women out there like me that didn't have somebody to look up to.
I was never fully aware of how important that is until I had a daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And
it changes you.
It really does.
Yeah.
And
you have this new obligation to make the world a better place.
To make a world a better place. And we had a person in our household who was not like me. And her interests and my interests are different. My son's interests and mine are different. But my daughter would ask questions that I never thought to ask. And we talked about earlier that she was excited for this episode to come out because she is constantly curious to see where she shows up.
Well, I love that she even asked that question, that she even took notice that you hadn't interviewed any women.
Right. Yeah. She, before we even began the show, this was on her radar, and it has helped me in my leadership to also think about not being singularly focused on my perspective, as the only perspective, number one, and number two, as the right perspective. Because even though it may be my only perspective because it's what I know, doesn't necessarily mean it's right. Or fully comprehensive of everything we need to see. And it's challenged me to be more ecumenical in how I think about solving a problem, and having a 7-year-old sitting at the table next to me to constantly ask me those questions is a really close to home kind of probe to say,
being
think
a parent
about this
is the
differently.
biggest and best job you will ever have. It's a huge responsibility.
You talking about and being open about your mental health and the ways that you want to be better for your kids, it resonates with me a lot. But I'm also curious how you set those boundaries, but then honor them, number one, and then number two. And then how you then model that, not just for your team, but for the organizations that you support, and then also for your children, because they see things that we don't even know that they see.
Right.
And I would often look back at my time when I was leading a nonprofit organization, and my practice was to check emails at 10:30 at night and then send them with no awareness of the impact that it would have on the person that was receiving that email. So the send later feature was like a game changer for me. So I'm curious, as you've spoken about identifying the need for those boundaries, you've established those boundaries. How do you honor them for yourself? And then how do you reflect them and model them for both your team, your clients, and your children?
It's funny that you talk about this because it was actually brought up to me pretty recently. I didn't realize that this was how I was perceived, but a friend of mine said that I say no all the time. Just made me laugh, but I guess she's right. I do say no a lot because I realize that saying yes to everything means that I'm going to have to say no to something, and vice versa. And I know that the season I'm in, and I've talked with a few friends about this recently, other moms as well, this is the season I'm in. You know, my kid is only this age for so long, and I don't want it to leave me and miss out on it. I used to be that person that, you know, I have to respond to an email in 24 hours. Nobody's expecting you to respond to their email in 24 hours. Hell, most people aren't even expecting it within a couple of days. I ran into somebody the other day and she was like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." I was like, "You are fine." And I think that's one thing that losing my mom has really taught me too, is to give people grace. Prior to losing my mom, if somebody canceled on me last minute, I used to be like, how dare them waste my time? Now, you have no idea what people are going through. You have no idea what challenges they might be facing. And to be understanding. And that there's so much more to life than work. I'm choosing to prioritize my family, myself, and my mental health. When my mom was in hospice and I was doing all the Google searches of, you know, how do you know when the last days are? How, you know, what are the signs to see? What do you think about when you're dying? And I did not come across anything that said, I wish I would have worked more. I wish I would have hit this milestone in my career. It was all, I wish I would have spent more time with my family. I wish I would have poured more into my friendships. So it's completely shifted my perspective. I observe people. I see what they do, and I use that for reference as an example of, how I want to live my life or how I don't want to live my life. I see a lot of people, you always hear these questions of like, who's your role model? What have they done to, make you admire them? So, well, I also look to those that maybe have accomplished a lot in their careers, but they don't have relationships with their spouse. They're divorced. They don't have a relationship with their kids. Therefore, they don't have a relationship with their grandkids. And so I think, was all that work, all those late nights, was it worth it? If in the end you're alone?
Yeah. I'm with you 100%. I lost my dad 3 years ago.
I'm sorry.
And about 12 hours after he passed, I had a board meeting for the organization I was leading. And I remember walking into that board meeting and sitting down, and the board looked around at me and some of the staff that was there. What the heck are you doing here? And ironically, not because of my dad, but coincidentally because of a few other issues, hardest year I ever had in that organization that I was leading. And my theory was there are so many people here depending on me that me not being in this meeting, this was an actual true statement, but me not being in this meeting had negative impacts, real and eventual, immediate and eventual for a lot of others. So I needed to be there. But it was also a moment to say, how do I get to a place where I'm not in a situation like this in the future?
Right.
Can't avoid it right now, but in the future, what do I need to build toward that? And that was the moment when I realized something has got to change here, which also made every other grievance that came after that weigh 1,000 pounds more because it was on top of the things that you knew were going to drive your impact.
And commitments don't go away.
No.
Right? You still have commitments. There's still things that you need to do. But I think it's also being honest and open of where you're at with them. After I lost my mom, it hit me hard. And, I questioned my business. I questioned my relationships. I questioned everything. And I actually resigned off of 2 boards. I'm only on 1 board right now, which is surprising to most because I think I'm perceived as somebody who's out and about in the community quite a bit. I'm actually not. I'm part of 2 organizations, one of which I'm on the board of, and that's it. Pick my kid up from school. I take her to school. Weekends are free. We travel. And I remember one time in particular, I was speaking on a panel, and it was just this last year. It was the anniversary of the date that my mom was hospitalized. And I didn't want to be on the panel. Everything in me wanted to cancel. And if I did, they would have understood. But I made a commitment, and somebody had come up to me and said, "How are you doing?" And I just autopiloted, "I'm good." And I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry. That was a lie. I'm actually not good." I said, "Today is the anniversary of the day that my mom was hospitalized, and I didn't want to be here today." Full transparency. And then that opened the door for her to say, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I actually lost my grandmother, and some of the things that you've shared, have been so open about sharing, has actually given me confidence and shown me that it's okay. It's going to be okay." So that was helpful to hear. But I think, when it all first happened, I asked my therapist, this is the type A person I am. I said, "So how much time should I allow for grief?" She's like, "Oh, Sunny, it doesn't work like that. Grief is non-lateral." And I said, "Well, this person was back at work, and this person was back, out networking." She said, "Well, our society doesn't know how to allow people to grieve and lament." I said, "Okay." Because in a lot of corporations, these people don't have a choice. They only have a couple days of bereavement. They have to go back. And I think back to the days where I couldn't get out of bed. And I told my husband, I said, if I worked for somebody else, I don't know if I would have a job. If I didn't have the team that I have, I don't know if I would still have a business. it's a journey.
So you are fortunate, in my opinion, that you've come to those realizations and you've come to them early enough to be able to make some modifications in the way that you work and the way that you show up.
The importance of processing.
It is. It is. And I think also acknowledging that, maybe I wasn't doing it perfectly for me in the past and I can make this modification. What if you're thinking about the nonprofit leaders that you support who may wear 10 different hats on any given day, and the systems and boundaries you've set up? What sorts of mindset shifts might you recommend for them that would create the familiarity or the confidence to develop some habits to A, continue to have big impact, but B, protect the energy that's necessary for them to have that sustained impact?
Yeah. Give yourself time. Give yourself space. You don't have to do everything. You can give up some control. Outsource if you can. Have that abundance mindset. Figure out what it is that you can do day to day that's going to allow you to show up as your favorite self. Just last week, I crashed and burned out. I was a little upset with myself for allowing that to happen because I thought I had done so well with figuring out this rhythm for my life and what worked for me and setting those boundaries. But what I discovered was, I kind of felt it coming too. And I told my husband, and it wasn't that I had jam-packed my schedule by any means. I have buffers between. I want to make sure that I do my follow-up, that I follow through with what I say I'm going to do. But I said to him, I feel like I need a break. I need not a week, but maybe just 2 to 3 days. 2 to 3 days where I don't talk to anybody and nobody talks to me. Just feeling very overstimulated. And I exercise every day, so I've got the stress relief. I do what I can within my control. But I could feel it coming. And when it hit last week, and I've done some reflection since, and when it hit, I had to clear my calendar. And I hate that happened, but my kid didn't want to go to school. There was just a lot of moving parts too. I realized that I was starting to do things and I was getting energy from these interactions, from these meetings, meeting wonderful people, reconnecting with people, but I was not taking into account the energy drain, the mental drain, the psychological drain that is grief. And so that's now something that I have to take with me moving forward.
You have talked a lot about the way that you've started new initiatives, you've started new community programs, you've obviously started a new company in the past in new communities. And the experiences that you've had, losing your friend Mac, losing your mom, those are all, I think, impact the way, from what I've heard and everything I know about you, how you approach legacy and how you approach showing up for your work. The barrier to starting something new can be really intimidating. And in particularly for folks that feel like that it may not be open to them. And I'm curious from your perspective, a woman in a new community a few years ago, what advice would you give to someone like you that wants to start something new that is going to help them be successful quicker and happier and more fulfilled?
Get out of your own way. Get out of your own way. I've had Catalyst now for 6 years. But if I'm quite honest, the first 2 years, according to my husband, I was just dicking around. But once I put my mind to things, once I got over the self-doubt, the negative self-talk, and really believed in myself and the work that we were doing, that's when revenue and sales skyrocketed. I don't want to leave this world wishing I would have done this or done that. I don't know if I could ever go back to working for somebody else. As I mentioned earlier, this allows me flexibility. This allows me work-life balance. This allows me, a conversation I had recently with a consultant, the ability to choose who we work with. We don't participate in RFPs because we're relational. I want to have a conversation with somebody and determine that it's a good fit on both sides. I want to do meaningful work. I don't want to be that person that gets the Sunday scaries, that can't wait till Friday. But it's not all rainbows. It's still, it doesn't shut off. I'm on vacation. I'm still kind of thinking. I'm on a walk. I'm listening to a podcast. I'm still kind of taking some notes. I think that's just the territory that comes with being an entrepreneur, a visionary, somebody that's growing, that's building, that you always have these ideas on how to improve. I think that's just ingrained in me. And that's okay.
That's awesome. Thank you. Huge thank you to Sunny Bray for joining me today. Sunny, your story is a powerful reminder that purpose doesn't come from avoiding the hard stuff, but from walking through it with honesty and courage and a commitment to building something better for others. Your leadership shows us what's possible when we lead both with a bold vision and, as you've shown today, vulnerability, and when we choose authenticity over approval. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating and review and share it with someone who you think would find it valuable. To learn more about Catalyst Collective and the work that they're doing to help nonprofits grow their impact, visit catalystcollective.co. We've got more amazing guests coming this season, so make sure to subscribe to Catalysts for Change wherever you get your podcasts, and visit us at catalystsforchangepod.com. Thank you again for listening to Catalyst for Change, brought to you in part by the Southern Research Collaborative. Until next time, I'm Adam Lister, and I'll see you soon.